The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Edwards Air Force Base, its golden rays illuminating the sleek fuselages of F-22 Raptors lined up like predatory birds waiting to take flight. Captain Sarah Sticky 6 Rodriguez adjusted her flight helmet one final time, the weight of it familiar, yet somehow heavier today. She had been flying for 8 years, but this morning felt different. Today, she would meet her new squadron commander, and the reputation that preceded Captain James Hawk Morrison was enough to make even the most seasoned pilots nervous. Sarah had earned her call sign, Sticky 6, during her first deployment in Afghanistan, when she had managed to maintain her position as the 6th aircraft in a complex formation through a harrowing encounter with enemy surface-to-air missiles. Her ability to stick to her wingman's 6 o'clock position, no matter how intense the situation became, had saved both their lives that day. The name stuck, and with it came respect from her peers and superiors alike. But Captain Morrison was different from any commander she had served under. His reputation was legendary throughout the Air Force. A decorated pilot with over 200 combat missions, 3 distinguished fly crosses, and a Silver Star. He was known for his tactical brilliance, his uncompromising standards, and, unfortunately, his old-school attitude toward female pilots. Sarah had heard the whispers in the ready rooms, the stories about how he believed women didn't belong in fighter cockpits, how he pushed female pilots harder than their male counterparts, seemingly hoping they would wash out. As Sarah walked toward the squadron building, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she had always looked up at the sky with wonder. Her father, a mechanic at the local airport, had taken her to air shows since she was 5 years old. She remembered the first time she saw the Thunderbirds perform, the way the F-16s seemed to dance through the air with impossible precision. That day, she knew she wanted to fly. The path hadn't been easy. Military aviation was still very much a man's world when she entered the Air Force Academy. She had to work twice as hard as her male classmates. Not because she was less capable, but because she constantly had to prove that she belonged. Every flight, every test, every evaluation was an opportunity for someone to question whether a woman could handle the physical and mental demands of flying a fighter aircraft. Sarah excelled despite the challenges. She graduated 3rd in her class from the academy and 1st in her flight training program. Her instructors noted her exceptional situational awareness, her steady hands under pressure, and her natural ability to think several steps ahead in combat scenarios. She was exactly the kind of pilot the Air Force needed, but some of the old guard still saw her gender before they saw her skills. The squadron ready room buzzed with activity as pilots prepared for the morning briefing. Sarah took her usual seat toward the back, noting the curious glances from the newer pilots who hadn't worked with her before. The room fell silent as Captain Morrison entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was taller than she had expected, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and badge precisely placed, speaking to years of distinguished service. Morrison's gaze swept across the room, taking inventory of his pilots. When his eyes landed on Sarah, she saw something flicker across his expression. Not quite disapproval, but certainly skepticism. She met his stare steadily, her chin raised slightly in a subtle display of confidence that had served her well throughout her career. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I'm Captain Morrison, your new squadron commander. I've reviewed all of your files, and I have high expectations for this unit. We will be the best fighter squadron in the Air Force, or we will find pilots who can make us the best." He began calling out assignments for the day's training exercises, pairing experienced pilots with newer ones, organizing formations, and outlining objectives. The missions were complex, air-to-air combat scenarios designed to test both individual skill and team coordination. Sarah listened carefully, waiting for her assignment. "Rodriguez." Morrison's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You'll be flying solo today. I want to see what you can do without someone holding your hand." The comment stung, implying that she had been coddled or given special treatment. Several pilots shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the subtle insult. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She had faced this kind of challenge before, and she knew the best response was to let her flying do the talking. "Yes, sir," she replied simply, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her chest. Morrison's lips curved into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Tell me, Rodriguez, what's your call sign again?" The question was delivered with a tone that suggested he already knew the answer, but wanted to hear it anyway. The room grew quieter, sensing the tension building between the commander and one of their most respected pilots. Sarah stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Sticky 6, sir," she answered, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ready room. Morrison's smirk widened slightly. "Sticky 6. Interesting name for someone who supposedly sticks to formations. We'll see how sticky you really are when you're flying against real competition." The challenge in his words was unmistakable. This wasn't just about a training exercise. It was about proving whether she deserved to be here, whether her reputation was earned or given. Sarah felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same determination that had carried her through every obstacle in her career. "I look forward to the opportunity, sir," she replied, her tone respectful, but with an underlying steel that made it clear she wasn't intimidated. The briefing continued with tactical discussions and safety protocols, but Sarah's mind was already in the cockpit. She knew Morrison was testing her, probably hoping she would back down or show some sign of weakness. Instead, she felt energized by the challenge. She had spent her entire career proving herself to people who doubted her capabilities, and today would be no different. After the briefing, Sarah made her way to the life support shop to collect her gear. Her fellow pilots offered words of encouragement, many of them having served with her long enough to know her capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, the squadron's operations officer, pulled her aside. "Sarah, be careful up there today," he warned quietly. "Morrison's got something to prove, and I think you're his way of proving it. Don't let him get in your head." She nodded, appreciating the concern, but feeling confident in her abilities. "I've been dealing with doubters my whole career, sir. Today won't be any different." As she suited up, Sarah thought about all the flights that had led to this moment. The countless hours in simulators, the grueling training exercises, the real combat missions where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. She had earned her place in this squadron through skill, dedication, and courage, not because of any special consideration or lowered standards. Walking toward her aircraft, she performed her pre-flight inspection with meticulous care. Every control surface, every system, every detail had to be perfect. Her crew chief, Senior Master Sergeant Williams, had been working with her for 2 years and knew her preferences. The aircraft was fueled, armed for training purposes, and ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. "She's all yours, Captain," Williams said with a grin. "Give him hell up there." Sarah climbed into the cockpit, the familiar environment wrapping around her like a second skin. This was where she belonged, where all the doubt and skepticism fell away, leaving only the pure connection between pilot and machine. She ran through her startup procedures with practiced efficiency, her hands moving across controls and switches with the confidence of thousands of hours of flight time. As she taxied toward the runway, Sarah could see Morrison in the tower, watching her through binoculars. She knew he was looking for any sign of hesitation, any indication that the pressure was getting to her. Instead, she felt calmer than she had all morning. In the air, there were no politics, no gender bias, no old boys club attitudes. There was only skill, training, and the pure physics of flight. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and Sarah advanced the throttles, feeling the familiar surge of power as the F-22's engine spooled up. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, and at exactly the right moment, she pulled back on the stick, lifting off into the crystal-clear California sky. Below her, Edwards Air Force Base grew smaller, but her resolve only grew stronger. She established radio contact with the range control officer, who began vectoring her toward the designated training area, where she would face whatever challenge Morrison had designed for her. As she climbed to altitude, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Whatever test awaited her, she was ready. She had been ready her entire life. The morning sun climbed higher, casting the desert landscape below in stark relief. Somewhere in this vast training area, Morrison had arranged for opponents who would test her skills to their limits. Sarah checked her weapons systems one final time, confirmed her position with GPS, and settled in for what she suspected would be the most important flight of her career. Unknown to her, Morrison had indeed arranged for something special. He had contacted 3 of the base's most experienced aggressor pilots, men who specialized in replicating enemy tactics and pushing American pilots to their breaking points. They were already airborne, waiting in different sectors of the training area, each armed with simulated weapons and orders to show no mercy. Morrison believed that if Rodriguez was truly as good as her reputation suggested, she would handle the challenge. If she wasn't, if she had been given easy assignments or special treatment because of her gender, today's exercise would expose that reality. Either way, he would have his answer about whether Sticky Six deserved to be in his squadron. As Sarah's F-22 disappeared into the morning haze, Morrison picked up his radio to contact the range controllers. The test was about to begin, and he intended to watch every moment of it. By the end of the day, he would know whether the woman who called herself Sticky Six was truly worthy of the name, or if it was time for her to find a new career path. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Sarah's flying skills, but also her mental toughness, her ability to overcome prejudice, and her determination to prove that she belonged among the elite pilots of the United States Air Force. In the vast blue sky over the Mojave Desert, the real battle for respect was about to begin. At 20,000 feet above the Mojave Desert, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of complete focus settling over her like a comfortable blanket. The world below faded to an abstract pattern of browns and tans, while the sky above stretched endlessly blue. Her F-22 responded to her slightest inputs with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, every system humming in perfect harmony. This was her domain, where years of training and natural instinct merged into something approaching artistry. The radio crackled to life with the voice of range control. Sticky Six, be advised you have multiple contacts bearing 270, Angels 15. Your exercise begins now. Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, but her hands remained steady on the controls. Multiple contacts meant Morrison had arranged for more than just a simple one-on-one engagement. She immediately began scanning the horizon while simultaneously checking her radar display. 3 distinct signatures appeared on her screen, spread across a 20-mile front. They were flying in what appeared to be a coordinated pattern, suggesting this was no random encounter. Copy, range control. Sticky Six is engaged, she transmitted, her voice calm despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. The first lesson every fighter pilot learned was that situational awareness was everything. Sarah quickly analyzed the tactical picture developing before her. The 3 aircraft were positioned to create what instructors called a hammer and anvil formation. 2 aircraft would attempt to drive her toward the third, limiting her escape routes and forcing her into a disadvantageous position. These weren't novice pilots she was facing. The precision of their positioning and the sophistication of their initial setup told her that Morrison had called in the aggressor squadron pilots who spent their careers studying enemy tactics and perfecting ways to defeat American aircraft. They flew older F-16s, but in the hands of experts, those aircraft could still pose a significant threat to even the most advanced fighters. Sarah's mind raced through her options. The F-22's stealth capabilities gave her an advantage at longer ranges, but once the engagement closed to visual range, superior numbers could quickly overwhelm even the most skilled pilot. She needed to use her aircraft's technological advantages while avoiding the trap her opponents were setting. Banking left, she began a shallow dive while simultaneously activating her electronic warfare systems. The F-22's sophisticated sensors began painting a detailed picture of the battlefield, identifying each opponent's position, altitude, and approximate heading. More importantly, her stealth profile meant they couldn't see her yet, giving her the element of surprise for the opening moves of this aerial chess match. "Bandit, bandit, bandit," she called out over the radio, officially declaring the exercise had become a combat engagement. Sticky 6 is engaged multiple hostiles. The first contact was approaching from her 10 o'clock position, climbing aggressively in what appeared to be an attempt to gain altitude advantage. Sarah recognized the tactic immediately. The pilot was trying to position himself above her, using gravity and altitude to increase his aircraft's energy state for the inevitable merge. It was a classic maneuver, but one that relied on the assumption that she would react predictably. Instead of climbing to meet the challenge, Sarah pushed her nose down and added power, diving toward the desert floor while maintaining her heading toward the second contact. The maneuver was counterintuitive. Most pilots would try to maintain the high ground in air combat, but Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes the unexpected move was the most effective one. Her radar warning receiver remained silent, confirming that the aggressor pilots still hadn't acquired a lock on her aircraft. The F-22's stealth technology was working perfectly, allowing her to close distance while remaining invisible to their targeting systems. She would have one chance to even the odds before the real dogfight began. At 15 miles from a nearest contact, Sarah selected one of her simulated AIM-120 missiles and waited for the optimal firing solution. The targeting computer worked rapidly, calculating intercept vectors and probability of kill based on dozens of variables. When the solution reached maximum effectiveness, she pulled the trigger. "Fox 3, she announced, indicating a simulated radar-guided missile launch. The computer immediately began tracking the virtual weapon's flight path toward the lead aggressor aircraft. The response was immediate and professional. "Viper 1 is notched," came the radio call, indicating the pilot had detected the missile launch and was maneuvering to defeat it. Sarah watched her display as the aircraft turned perpendicular to the missile's approach, using the Doppler effect to potentially break the weapon's lock. But Sarah had anticipated this response. As soon as she fired the first missile, she had begun maneuvering for a second shot. The aggressor pilot's defensive maneuver had turned him directly into the path she had predicted, giving her an even better firing solution for her second weapon. "Fox 3, she called again, launching her second simulated missile at the same target. This time, the aggressor pilot's options were limited. His defensive maneuver against the first missile had put him in a vulnerable position for the second. The exercise computer calculated the engagement and declared Viper 1, "You were dead," over the radio frequency. 1 down, 2 to go. But Sarah's success had cost her the element of surprise. The remaining 2 aggressor pilots now knew exactly where she was and were converging on her position with deadly intent. Her radar warning receiver suddenly came alive with a harsh tone indicating multiple aircraft were attempting to lock onto her with their targeting systems. "Sticky 6 is spiked," she announced, letting range control know she was being targeted. The real test was just beginning. The second aggressor, call sign Viper 2, was approaching from her right side at high speed, while Viper 3 was climbing to intercept her from below. They were executing a perfect bracket maneuver, approaching from different directions and altitudes to prevent her from maneuvering away from both threats simultaneously. Sarah's training took over as she analyzed the geometry of the engagement. The key to surviving a 2-on-1 fight was to avoid fighting both opponents at the same time. She needed to separate them, forcing each pilot to engage her individually rather than as a coordinated team. Rolling inverted, she pulled hard toward Viper 2, the pilot approaching from her right. The aggressive maneuver was designed to force him into a defensive reaction while simultaneously complicating Viper 3's intercept geometry. G-forces pressed her down into her seat as the F F-22 responded instantly to her control inputs. The aircraft's fly-by-wire system automatically adjusting control surfaces to maintain optimal performance. Viper 2 reacted exactly as Sarah had hoped, turning hard to avoid a head-on engagement. But his defensive turn had given Sarah the angle she needed. As the two aircraft merged at a combined speed of over 1,200 miles per hour, Sarah pulled her nose through the vertical and locked onto his aircraft with her simulated targeting system. Fox 2, she called, indicating a short-range infrared missile shot. The engagement computer calculated the parameters and declared Viper 2 dead as well. 2 down, 1 to go. But Viper 3 had used Sarah's engagement with his wingman to gain position advantage. As Sarah completed her attack on Viper 2, she found herself in the worst possible situation for a fighter pilot, defensive with an aggressive enemy on her tail. Sticky 6 is defensive, she announced, officially declaring that she was now the one being hunted rather than the hunter. The pilot flying Viper 3 was clearly the most experienced of the group. His positioning was perfect, keeping his aircraft in Sarah's vulnerable rear quarter while maintaining the proper range to prevent her from using her superior maneuverability to reverse the situation. This was the kind of pilot who had probably shot down dozens of American fighters in training scenarios. Sarah's mind raced through her options. The traditional defensive maneuvers, hard turns, climbs, and dives, were all being countered by her opponent's precise flying. He was staying locked on her tail like a bloodhound, waiting for the perfect moment to take a shot. Then, she remembered a tactic her instructor at the weapons school had taught her years earlier. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it might be her only chance to escape the trap closing around her. Sarah began a climbing turn to the right, allowing Viper 3 to close distance slightly. To her opponent, it would appear that she was making a mistake, giving him the perfect opportunity for a shot. But Sarah was counting on human nature and the aggressor pilot's confidence in his superior position. As Viper 3 moved into firing position, Sarah suddenly reversed her turn and pulled her aircraft into a violent split-S maneuver, rolling inverted and pulling straight down toward the desert floor. The sudden change in direction and altitude caught her opponent by surprise, and for a crucial few seconds, she was out of his targeting envelope. It was the opening she needed. Using the F-22's superior thrust-to-weight ratio, Sarah pulled out of the dive and immediately began climbing again, but this time at an angle that put the sun directly behind her aircraft. The tactical advantage of the sun position was as old as aerial combat itself, and even modern fighter aircraft with sophisticated sensors could still be affected by the blazing desert sun. Viper 3 was good, but he had been momentarily blinded by Sarah's maneuver and the sun's position. By the time he reacquired her aircraft, she had gained enough separation to reverse the engagement once again. Sticky 6 is no longer defensive, she announced, the relief evident in her voice despite her professional tone. The dogfight continued for another 10 minutes, with both pilots demonstrating skills that would have been impressive in any context. Viper 3 managed to gain position advantage twice more, but each time Sarah found a way to escape and reset the engagement. Her superior aircraft and exceptional training were beginning to tell, but her opponent's experience kept him in the fight longer than should have been possible. Finally, during a complex series of maneuvers that took both aircraft from 30,000 feet down to less than 5,000 above the desert floor, Sarah managed to maneuver behind Viper 3 as he attempted a desperation climb. The shot was perfect, simulated gun tracking solution at close range with no possibility of escape. Guns, 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 she called out, indicating a simulated cannon attack. Viper 3, you are dead. The exercise computer confirmed the kill, and Viper 3 professionally acknowledged his defeat. Good fight, Sticky 6. Viper 3 is RTB. As the three aggressor aircraft turned toward home, Sarah remained alone in the vast training airspace, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline of combat. She had faced 3 experienced pilots in a scenario designed to test her limits, and she had emerged victorious. But More importantly, she had done it while flying with the precision and professionalism that defined the best fighter pilots in the world. The radio crackled with the voice of range control. Sticky 6, exercise complete. Return to base for debrief. As Sarah turned toward Edwards Air Force Base, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The test Morrison had designed for her was over, and she had passed with flying colors. But she knew the real challenge was just beginning. When she landed, she would have to face Morrison's reaction to her performance and prove that her success wasn't just luck or a fluke. The desert landscape passed beneath her as she headed home, the morning sun now climbing higher in the sky. In a few minutes, she would be back on the ground, back in a world where her gender mattered more than her skills to some people. But for now, she was still flying, still in her element, still proving that call signs like Sticky 6 were earned through skill and courage rather than given through favoritism. The real reckoning was waiting for her on the ground. The landing at Edwards Air Force Base was textbook perfect, Sarah's F-22 touching down with barely a whisper as the main gear kissed the runway. As she taxied toward the squadron ramp, she could see a small crowd gathering near the operations building. Word of her engagement with the aggressor squadron had apparently spread quickly through the base, as it always did when something significant happened in the training airspace. Sarah shut down the engines and began her post-flight procedures with the same methodical precision she brought to every aspect of her flying. Her crew chief, Senior Master Sergeant Williams, was waiting with a ladder as she opened the canopy, but his usual smile was replaced with a look of concern. "Captain, how'd it go up there?" he asked quietly as she climbed down from the cockpit. 3 for 3, Sarah replied simply, pulling off her helmet. The Raptor performed flawlessly, as always. Williams' expression shifted to one of pride and relief. "That's my girl," he said, referring to the aircraft with the affection that all dedicated crew chiefs felt for their planes. "I heard Captain Morrison was watching from the tower the whole time." Sarah nodded, her jaw tightening slightly. She had expected as much. Morrison wouldn't have arranged such an elaborate test without personally observing the results. As she gathered her gear and headed toward the debriefing room, she mentally prepared herself for whatever reaction awaited her. The squadron building buzzed with activity as Sarah entered. Pilots and support personnel moved with purpose through the corridors, but she noticed how conversations seemed to pause as she passed. Some faces showed admiration and respect, others curiosity, and a few displayed the kind of skepticism she had grown accustomed to throughout her career. The formal debrief was conducted in the main briefing room with range control personnel and the aggressor pilots participating via video link. The 3 Viper pilots were professional in their assessment, acknowledging Sarah's tactical decisions and execution with the kind of respect that only fellow fighter pilots could truly appreciate. The initial defensive setup was textbook, commented the lead aggressor pilot, Major Razor Thompson, whose voice carried the slight hoarseness that came from years of high-G flying. "We thought we had you bracketed perfectly, but Rodriguez anticipated our game plan and turned it against us." Captain Snake Williams, who had flown as Viper 3, was particularly complimentary about Sarah's final maneuvers. "That split S reversal when I had gun tracking was inspired. Most pilots would have tried to turn fight their way out, but she used the vertical plane and energy management like she'd been doing it for 20 years. Throughout the technical debrief, Morrison remained silent, taking notes but offering no comments or questions. His expression was unreadable, giving Sarah no indication of whether he was impressed or simply withholding judgment. The other squadron members present seemed to sense the tension, their own contributions to the discussion more subdued than usual. When the formal debrief concluded, Morrison stood and addressed the room. "Thank you, gentlemen. Excellent work today. Rodriguez, my office, 15 minutes. The dismissal was curt and professional, but Sarah detected something different in Morrison's tone. The earlier smugness was gone, replaced by what sounded almost like uncertainty. As the room cleared, several of her squadron mates offered quiet words of encouragement, and congratulations, but Sarah's mind was already focused on the upcoming one-on-one meeting with her commanding officer. Morrison's office was spartanly decorated, the walls displaying his numerous commendations and photographs from various squadrons and deployments. Behind his desk hung a large photograph of him standing beside an F-15 Eagle, taken during his days as a young lieutenant. Sarah noticed that despite his reputation for being old school, his desk was meticulously organized with modern computer equipment and current tactical manuals. "Close the door and take a seat," Morrison said without looking up from the paperwork he was reviewing. Sarah complied, settling into the chair across from his desk with the same confident posture she maintained in the cockpit. She had learned long ago that showing any sign of intimidation or uncertainty would be interpreted as weakness, especially by commanders like Morrison, who seemed to be looking for reasons to doubt her capabilities. Morrison finished whatever he was reading and looked up, his steel-gray eyes studying Sarah's face as if searching for something. The silence stretched for several long seconds before he finally spoke. "I've been in the Air Force for 22 years. He began, his voice measured and thoughtful. "I've commanded fighter squadrons, flown combat missions over 3 different theaters, and trained some of the finest pilots this service has ever produced. In all that time, I've developed certain expectations about what makes an effective fighter pilot." Sarah remained silent, sensing that Morrison was working through something significant in his own mind. This wasn't the confrontation she had expected, but rather something more complex and personal. "When I reviewed your file before taking command of this squadron," Morrison continued, "I saw all the right qualifications on paper. Outstanding test scores, stellar performance evaluations, combat experience, and recommendations from previous commanders that were nothing short of glowing. But I also saw something that concerned me." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I saw a pattern that I've observed before in my career. Sometimes, in our effort to be inclusive and progressive, we create situations where certain individuals receive opportunities or advancement based on factors other than pure merit. I needed to know whether you were here because you're the best pilot available or because the Air Force needed to fill a quota." The word stung, but Sarah had heard variations of this argument throughout her career. She kept her expression neutral, waiting to see where Morrison was leading the conversation. "So I arranged today's exercise," Morrison admitted. "I called in favors with the aggressor squadron to set up a scenario that would test not just your flying skills, but your judgment under pressure, your tactical thinking, and your ability to adapt when things don't go according to plan. I wanted to see if Sticky Six was a real call sign earned through competence or just a nickname that sounded impressive." Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. "What I observed today was one of the finest displays of air-to-air combat flying I've seen in over 2 decades of military service. Your tactical decisions were sound, your execution was flawless, and your ability to maintain composure while being hunted by 3 experienced aggressor pilots was remarkable." Sarah felt a mix of relief and vindication, but she remained cautious. Morrison's acknowledgement was important, but she sensed there was more he needed to say. "But what impressed me most," Morrison continued, "wasn't your flying ability. It was your professionalism throughout the entire exercise. When I challenged you this morning, when I questioned your call sign and your capabilities, you could have responded with anger or defensiveness. Instead, you simply said you looked forward to the opportunity to prove yourself. That kind of confidence and maturity is rare at any level, but especially among pilots who are still building their careers." Morrison stood and moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where several F-22s were being prepared for afternoon sorties. "I owe you an apology, Captain Rodriguez. I allowed my personal biases and preconceptions to cloud my judgment about your abilities. That was unprofessional and unfair, and it won't happen again." The apology was unexpected and seemed genuine, but Sarah knew this was a crucial moment in establishing her relationship with her new commander. Her response would set the tone for everything that followed. Sir, I appreciate your honesty, she said carefully. I've faced skepticism about my abilities throughout my career, and I've learned that the only way to overcome doubt is through performance. I don't expect special treatment or consideration because of my gender, but I also don't expect to be held to different standards. All I ask is the opportunity to prove myself on the same terms as every other pilot in this squadron. Morrison turned back to face her, and for the first time since their initial meeting, she saw something approaching respect in his expression. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. And based on what I saw today, I have no doubt that you'll continue to prove yourself every time you strap into that cockpit. He returned to his desk and picked up a folder that Sarah hadn't noticed before. Which brings me to why I really wanted to speak with you privately. I've been reviewing upcoming deployment schedules and special assignments, and there's an opportunity that I think you'd be perfect for. Sarah's pulse quickened. Special assignments in the fighter community were rare and highly competitive, often involving classified missions or advanced training programs that could significantly accelerate a pilot's career. Operation Northern Shield, Morrison explained, opening the folder and scanning its contents. It's a joint exercise with our NATO allies in Alaska, focused on Arctic air superiority tactics. The Air Force is looking for experienced F-22 pilots to serve as mission commanders and tactical instructors for visiting Allied pilots. The assignment sounded both challenging and rewarding, exactly the kind of opportunity Sarah had been hoping for since arriving at Edwards. But she also sensed there might be complications. The exercise runs for 6 months, Morrison continued, and involves pilots from 8 different countries. You'd be one of only 12 American pilots selected, and the youngest mission commander in the program's history. It's the kind of assignment that could fast-track you to squadron command within the next few years. Sarah felt excitement building, but she forced herself to remain composed. What would my specific responsibilities be, sir? You'd be responsible for training foreign pilots in F-22 capabilities and tactics, developing and leading complex air-to-air scenarios, and serving as a liaison between American forces and our NATO allies. It's a highly visible assignment that would put you in direct contact with senior officers from multiple air forces. The opportunity was even better than Sarah had initially thought. International experience was highly valued in the modern Air Force, and successfully completing a mission commander role would demonstrate leadership capabilities that could open doors throughout her career. There's one more thing, Morrison added, his tone becoming more serious. The officer who recommended you for this assignment specifically cited today's performance against the aggressor squadron. Apparently, word of your 3-versus-1 victory has already reached some very senior people in the Pentagon. Sarah tried to hide her surprise. She had known that training exercises were sometimes observed by higher command, but she hadn't realized that her performance had been significant enough to warrant attention from Washington. Sir, I'm honored to be considered for this assignment, she replied. When would I need to depart? 2 weeks, Morrison answered. I know it's short notice, but the exercise begins next month, and they need time to get you briefed and integrated with the planning staff. Are you interested? The question was really a formality. Opportunities like this came along rarely in a military career, and turning it down would be professional suicide. But Sarah also recognized that Morrison was offering her something more than just an assignment. He was offering his support and endorsement, acknowledging that she belonged among the Air Force's elite pilots. Yes, sir. I'm very interested, she said firmly. Morrison smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since their initial meeting. Outstanding. I'll inform the assignment branch this afternoon, and you should receive your official orders within 48 hours. As Sarah stood to leave, Morrison extended his hand. Captain Rodriguez, it's been an honor to serve with you, even briefly. The Air Force is lucky to have pilots like you, and I expect to hear great things about your performance in Alaska. The handshake was firm and respectful, a far cry from the skeptical reception she had received just hours earlier. As Sarah left Morrison's office, she reflected on the dramatic change in their relationship and what it meant for her future in the Air Force. Walking across the base toward her quarters, Sarah felt a profound sense of validation. The test she had faced today wasn't just about proving her flying skills. It was about proving that she belonged among the Air Force's best pilots regardless of her gender. Morrison's transformation from skeptic to supporter demonstrated that even the most entrenched attitudes could be changed through exceptional performance and professional behavior. But perhaps more importantly, the opportunity in Alaska represented a chance to take her career to the next level. As a mission commander in an international exercise, she would have the platform to demonstrate leadership capabilities and build relationships with senior officers from around the world. It was exactly the kind of assignment that could position her for squadron command and beyond. The sun was setting over the Mojave Desert as Sarah reached her quarters, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and preparations for her deployment to Alaska, but tonight she could allow herself a moment of satisfaction. She had proven that Sticky 6 wasn't just a call sign. It was a symbol of competence, courage, and the determination to succeed against any odds. The real test, however, was still ahead. 6 months later, the Arctic winds howled across Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska as Sarah stood at the podium in the main briefing hall, looking out at an audience of 32 pilots from 8 different nations. The conclusion of Operation Northern Shield had arrived, and as the senior mission commander, she was preparing to deliver the final briefing that would summarize the exercise's achievements and lessons learned. The months in Alaska had transformed Sarah in ways she couldn't have imagined when she first received her orders. The responsibility of commanding international air operations, the complexity of managing cultural differences among Allied pilots, and the technical challenges of operating in the extreme Arctic environment had pushed her capabilities far beyond anything she had experienced in her career. But more than that, the assignment had proven to herself and others that the call sign Sticky 6 represented something deeper than tactical flying ability. Over the course of the exercise, she had navigated diplomatic tensions between competing allies, resolved technical disputes that could have derailed training objectives, and earned the respect of senior officers who initially viewed her appointment with skepticism. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. The first month of the exercise had tested every leadership skill Sarah possessed. Several Allied pilots, particularly from more traditional military cultures, had initially questioned taking tactical direction from a young American woman. There had been subtle resistance, missed radio calls, and a general atmosphere of professional doubt that reminded her of her early days at Edwards. But Sarah had learned from her experience with Morrison that the only effective response to skepticism was exceptional performance. She threw herself into every aspect of the mission, studying the tactical preferences and cultural backgrounds of each Allied nation, learning key phrases in multiple languages, and demonstrating an encyclopedic knowledge of both American and foreign aircraft capabilities. The breakthrough had come during a complex scenario involving simulated air defense penetration of heavily defended Arctic territory. The mission required precise coordination between American F-22s, Canadian CF-18s, Norwegian F-16s, and British Typhoons, each aircraft bringing different capabilities and limitations to the engagement. When the initial tactical plan failed during execution, leaving the formation scattered and vulnerable to simulated enemy surface-to-air missiles, Sarah had taken command of the chaotic situation. Using her understanding of each aircraft's strengths, she improvised a new approach that reorganized the formation into complementary pairs, with American stealth aircraft leading and Allied fighters providing backup firepower. The revised tactics had not only salvaged the mission, but achieved objectives that exceeded the original plan. More importantly, the successful adaptation had been accomplished through clear communication and tactical leadership that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. From that day forward, no Allied pilot questioned Sarah's authority or competence. Colonel Anders Lundberg from the Swedish Air Force, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, had pulled Sarah aside after that mission to offer his assessment. "Captain Rodriguez," he had said in his careful English, "I have flown with many American pilots over the years, but I have never seen someone adapt so quickly to the complexities of international cooperation. You have earned something today that cannot be given: the respect of warriors from 8 different nations." That respect had grown throughout the remaining months of the exercise. Sarah found herself serving not just as a mission commander, but as an unofficial ambassador for American aviation, representing the United States in formal dinners with visiting dignitaries, technical discussions with foreign defense contractors, and strategic planning sessions with allied general officers. The cultural exchange had been as valuable as the tactical training. Sarah had learned about different approaches to pilot training, alternative tactical philosophies, and the unique challenges faced by smaller air forces with limited resources. She had developed friendships with pilots from around the world, relationships that would serve American interests for decades to come. But perhaps the most significant development had been the message she received from Captain Morrison 3 months into the deployment. The secure communication had been brief but profound in its implications. "Rodriguez," the message read, "your performance in Alaska has been noted at the highest levels. The Joint Chiefs have specifically requested a briefing on the international cooperation techniques you've developed. More importantly, you have single-handedly changed perceptions about American female pilots among our NATO allies. Several foreign defense ministers have specifically asked about the possibility of exchange programs to learn from your approach to leadership development. Your work there is having strategic implications far beyond the scope of the original exercise. Well done." Morrison. The acknowledgement from her former skeptical commander had meant more to Sarah than any formal commendation. It represented validation not just of her technical skills, but of her ability to represent the Air Force and the United States on the international stage. Now, as she prepared to deliver the final briefing, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that morning at Edwards when Morrison had questioned whether her call sign was earned or given. The officer standing at this podium had commanded complex international operations, solved diplomatic crises, and earned recognition from foreign governments for her contributions to Allied cooperation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the large briefing hall. "Operation Northern Shield began 6 months ago with 32 pilots from 8 nations, representing different air forces, different cultures, and different approaches to aerial warfare. Today, we conclude this exercise not as separate national contingents, but as a unified fighting force capable of operating together against any threat." The statistics she presented were impressive by any measure. Over 6 months, the combined force had flown more than 800 sorties, executed 150 complex tactical scenarios, and achieved a mission success rate of 94%. But the numbers only told part of the story. "What we have accomplished here transcends tactical aviation," Sarah continued. "We have proven that cultural differences can be transformed into tactical advantages when pilots understand and respect each other's capabilities. We have demonstrated that international cooperation can enhance rather than complicate military effectiveness when it's built on mutual respect and shared professional standards." As she spoke, Sarah could see the faces of pilots who had become more than just colleagues over the past months. Captain Hans Müller from Germany, who had initially been skeptical of American tactics, but became one of Sarah's strongest supporters after she helped him develop new techniques for operating his Typhoon in Arctic conditions. Major Jean Rousseau from France, who had shared his extensive experience with air-to-air refueling operations and worked with Sarah to develop new protocols for mixed nationality formations. The formal briefing covered technical achievements, tactical innovations, and operational lessons learned. But Sarah also made sure to address the human dimension of what they had accomplished together. "The most important lesson we have learned," she said, "is that excellence in military aviation is not limited by nationality, gender, or cultural background. It is defined by competence, professionalism, and the willingness to place mission success above personal advancement." Every pilot in this room has demonstrated those qualities, and every nation represented here should be proud of the men and women who wear their uniforms. When the formal briefing concluded, the Allied commanders rose in sustained applause, something Sarah had never witnessed at a military briefing before. But the real validation came in the private conversations that followed, as senior officers from each nation approached her with personal thanks and professional recognition. General Sir David Crawford, the senior British representative, spoke for many when he told Sarah privately, "Captain, in 30 years of military service, I have rarely seen a young officer handle complex leadership responsibilities with such grace and effectiveness. Your performance here has enhanced the reputation of American military aviation throughout NATO, and I will be recommending to my government that we request you specifically for future joint exercises." The personal moment that meant the most came from Captain Eric Larson, a Norwegian pilot who had initially been among the most resistant to female leadership. On the final day of the exercise, he had approached Sarah with obvious discomfort, but genuine sincerity. "Captain Rodriguez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology and an explanation. In my country's Air Force, we have very few female pilots, and I had never served under a woman's command. My initial resistance to your leadership was not based on your performance, but on my own cultural limitations. You have taught me that competence and courage have no gender, and I am a better officer because of your example." As Sarah packed her gear for the return journey to the continental United States, she received a secure communication that would change the trajectory of her career once again. The message was from Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, the first female general officer in Air Combat Command, and it was both congratulatory and life-changing. "Captain Rodriguez," the message read, "your performance as mission commander for Operation Northern Shield has exceeded all expectations and has been noted by the Air Force Chief of Staff. Based on the recommendations of multiple Allied commanders and the strategic value of your work in Alaska, you are being selected for immediate promotion to Major and assignment as Deputy Operations Officer for the 1st Fighter Wing at Langley Air Force Base. This assignment will position you for squadron command within 18 months, making you one of the youngest fighter squadron commanders in Air Force history. Your example has opened doors for future generations of female military aviators, and your country is grateful for your service. Congratulations, Major Rodriguez." The promotion and assignment were beyond anything Sarah had imagined when she first received her orders for Alaska. More than that, they represented recognition that her contributions went beyond individual achievement to include institutional change that would benefit the entire Air Force. As her aircraft lifted off from Eielson for the final time, Sarah looked down at the Arctic landscape that had been her home for 6 months. The experience had transformed her from a skilled pilot with potential into a proven leader ready for the highest levels of command responsibility. But more importantly, it had demonstrated that the barriers facing female military aviators could be overcome through exceptional performance and unwavering professionalism. The call sign Sticky 6 had begun as a recognition of her ability to maintain formation under fire. But it had evolved into something much more significant, a symbol of determination, competence, and the courage to succeed in environments where success wasn't guaranteed or even expected. Major Sarah Rodriguez settled back in her seat for the long flight home, already thinking about the challenges and opportunities that awaited her at Langley. The little girl from Texas who had watched the Thunderbirds perform and dreamed of flying fighter aircraft had become something she never could have imagined, a role model and trailblazer whose achievements would inspire future generations of military aviators. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that in the unforgiving world of military aviation, respect was earned not through politics or special consideration, but through the timeless virtues of skill, courage, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The captain who had once smirked when he heard her call sign would never make that mistake again, and neither would anyone else who underestimated what it meant to be called Sticky 6. The aircraft climbed toward the aurora borealis dancing across the Arctic sky, carrying home an officer whose story had become legend and whose example would echo through the halls of the Air Force Academy for generations to come. In a world where breaking barriers required more than just opening doors, Major Rodriguez had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to doubt was simply the quiet confidence to excel beyond all expectations.